First, how do you fight or even explain the invisible machine?
Imagine the future. A strange new weapon detonated high over a large city. No explosion, no visible destruction, but everything electronic within the range of this weapon dies permanently. Every electronic gadget in every home and office disabled. No computers, no TV, no life support systems in hospitals, no water supply, no heat, no lights. Truly a return to the Dark Ages.
Everything that we've built up in the last 200 years, let alone in the last 20 years, would be completely destroyed, would be non-existent. Imagine the cost that it would be to rebuild our cities. Think of it in terms of transportation. We might even have to pump water. It's at that basic level.
Imagine a full range of new weapons. One can take out the electricity in your city. The other can destroy you.
We have been testing what I'm going to call microwave weapons for crowd control. You can affect a large area by sweeping the beam and making sure that people are in the beam long enough to get a very nasty sensation of being cooked, which, to a very fine depth, they are.
If you haven't heard about these weapons, it's no surprise. Their development has been secretive, and they sound more like science fiction than reality.
We're just learning enough about the science to be dangerous. It's like giving a kindergartner a hand grenade and hoping they don't pull the pin.
Welcome to the world of electromagnetic warfare. Bell Island, Newfoundland, on the edge of the Atlantic. A uniquely quiet place until one Sunday morning in April 1978. As people made their way to church, a colossal bolt of energy shot straight out of the sky, blasting the peaceful island. Barbara McKim witnessed the bolt from her house in Conception Bay, 20 kilometers from Bell Island.
We heard this terrific, loud bang, boom noise. The house shook. The dishes rattled in the cupboards. We ran to the living room window and looked out in time to see an oval-shaped object that was moving very, very quickly, and it just seemed to leave a bit of a trail behind. It was quite loud, quite deafening. There was no wobbly movement or anything, no. It was just a trajectory that was heading toward, as we thought at the time, the ocean, but subsequently it did land on the island, yeah.
The bizarre beam was seen by dozens as it exploded onto the property of Jim and Susie Beckford, shattering the solemn Sunday morning. Television sets exploded, fuses shot out of the walls, balls of fire tore through houses.
Yes, I was on Bell Island, April 2nd, 1978.
Steve Parsley, neighbour and son-in-law of the Beckfords, had just left the barn when the bolt struck.
Well, we looked there through the door and seen, all we could see was dust and ore dust, everything else gone. It was where all the shed blowed up, so it was, and the barn blowed up. But it's an awful blast.
Satellites registered light emissions equivalent to those of a 10-megaton blast, making it one of the biggest emissions in history. In Ottawa, Canadian military scanners also picked up the 10-megaton blast. The Prime Minister was alerted, and Fire Inspector Jim Farrell dispatched.
As soon as I saw the fuses and the embedment in the wall, I knew I had something here that was different. I was amazed. The barn was in shambles. Chickens and hens were dead. When I saw the electricity after, or the supercharge after attacking the nails in the floor. When I went outside, I noticed the wires, the insulation just dripping off the wires. I showed Mr. Beckford. He was amazed. He said, "My God, what was it?" And I said, "Boy, I don't know."
While the military investigation continued, the intelligence branch of the RCMP decided to launch their own inquiry.
We had reports from across the Conception Bay here of people that reported seeing objects fall on the island and that. So we checked that out. I ruled it as an electrical, possibly lightning or ball lightning, and that's how we concluded our file.
It wasn't a lightning strike. It was a boom of a ray. It was something like I would see in a James Bond movie.
Lightning, I don't think this blast up here, you know, we came from God knows where, investigating them. So it seems like it was, you know, it was more than lightning.
The official reports concluded that the blast was caused by ball lightning, but the local residents were skeptical and wondered if it had really been caused by a failed military experiment. This was 1978, and given the Cold War climate, speculation and fear were rampant. Russia and the Americans were protecting and developing their nuclear arsenals. Reason enough for fear. But what wasn't known about was the developing and testing of a very new and secret wave of weapons. By the time the blast occurred on Bell Island, these electromagnetic or directed energy weapons had been in the works for 30 years. This research has continued and will usher in a whole new way of war.
The revolution in military affairs, the RMA as the military calls it, which is a total shift away from bombs, bullets, and ordnance into energy weapons as the primary driver, whether it be high-powered lasers, ion beams, microwave radiation for creating heat sensations on the body. This is where the direction is going. And the military, in a paper called The Revolution in Military Affairs and Conflict Short of War, written in 1989 by the U.S. Army War College, talked about this shift, and they equated it to the discovery of, or the introduction rather, of gunpowder in the Middle Ages in Europe and the introduction of atomic weapons in the last century. The change that's taking place now is just as profound as the changes that took place then.
It has been said that the history of mankind is the history of war. If that is true, then the history of man is about to take a frightening leap into the future.
Since the beginning of the age of modern science, you've obviously seen a rapid development in rapid improvement in the technology of weapons. It's perfectly obvious. You starting with gunpowder, really. The cannon-bearing ship, the rise of air forces, improvements in explosives, and so on and so forth.
When the First World War broke out, all of this military technology and force was unleashed on the world. A generation enjoying the peace and progress of liberal society was amazed and shocked. That war pitched the world into a century of violence.
This ascending curve of technical capacity to unleash violence, of course, reached its absolute apogee with the appearance of the nuclear weapon. This really brought to a culmination a tendency that had begun, way back in the Stone Age, when the first human being picked up a bone and started beating his rival. It really began there and continued all the way to the nuclear weapon.
The prospect of mutually assured destruction might have kept the superpowers in check, but it did nothing to slow weapons development. As the 21st century unfolds, the same technology that gave us the benefit of cell phones, microwaves, and remote control is now being applied to a completely new array of powerful weapons. A development veiled in secrecy, until a certain New York Times reporter started digging.
Well, the New York Times wanted to do a story on the new frontiers of military technology, and we have done a lot of work previously on what have been called smart bombs and the satellite-guided munitions. We really wanted to find really what the next frontier was. And I did some reporting, talking to some military analysts that I know, and also some people actually in the investment community who follow companies that make their money off government contracts. And they mentioned to me this whole new category of weapons known as directed energy or electromagnetic weapons. And that's really how we found out about it. And then we started doing some reporting, and one of the hard things about it was that the government really didn't want to come forward with a lot of information. Most of these programs still remain secret or classified.
Manufacturers are now developing a full range of electromagnetic weapons which pack an invisible wallop, hundreds of times more powerful than the electrical current in a lightning bolt. One can blast enemy missiles out of the sky. Another can be used to blind soldiers on a battlefield. Still another to control an unruly crowd by burning the surface of their skin. If detonated over a large city, an electromagnetic weapon could destroy all electronics in seconds. Though their effects may be different, they have one remarkable feature in common. They all use directed energy to create a powerful electromagnetic pulse.
What is an electromagnetic pulse weapon? Actually, you can think of it, probably too simply but not terribly inaccurately, as a lightning bolt on steroids. Right now, an electromagnetic pulse from a lightning bolt is a pretty crude club. The wavelength is way too long. So ideally, what you would like to do is shift the energy of the electromagnetic pulse from the long wavelength of a lightning bolt down into a microwave. Now, what is a microwave? Microwaves are all the waves between a meter and a millimeter. Now think of how well that couples with everything in our society, because almost everything we use electronically fits between a meter and a millimeter. If you look at a standard electromagnetic device that's made to read electromagnetic pulses like your cell phone, here's an antenna. It's actually made to absorb electromagnetic radiation. It's just not designed to take the power of the pulse of an electromagnetic weapon.
These electromagnetic weapons can be used to destroy basically anything with a chip in it. Not only communication systems and devices, but power systems, television and radio systems. Even most cars these days have an electronic ignition in them. And if they were deployed in the relevant place, in our society now, and in many countries, anything with a chip in it could be disabled.
The electromagnetic pulse effect as a weapon really came to our attention quite accidentally during the early atomic tests. When the first detonations occurred, unprotected electromagnetic equipment, which we had a lot of back then, died. And of course, this came to everybody's attention because a lot of this was instrumentation that was supposed to be recording the effects of the weapon. So, of course, everybody standing around this early destroyed and arced out and melted equipment, shaking their heads and saying, what happened? Especially since there was no wind damage, there was no overpressure damage, there was just fried electrical equipment. Well, it didn't take long after a few tests and iterations to realize there's a huge electromagnetic pulse generated when a nuclear weapon explodes. And a huge electromagnetic pulse is very destructive to unprotected electrical equipment. And then it was sort of like, whoa, there's a weapon effect here. So early in the 50s, at Los Alamos, where they were doing this high-level nuclear work, they said, what about just creating this electromagnetic pulse? And that's where the early work was done on trying to figure out a way to convert explosive energy into electrical energy. And since that time, we've had laboratories and an active research program that's been spending its time develop electromagnetic and high-energy microwave weapons.
The Los Alamos lab in New Mexico, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, and an area controlled by the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense. Signs warn visitors that roads may be closed at any time without warning.